We're going to go now to our telephone so we can have our listeners to converse with none other than Ben Ammi. Good morning, caller. How are you today?
Hello?
Hello. Turn off your radio.
Just a moment. Didn't realize I was number one here. Yes, good morning, gentlemen. I was calling to ask, seems as this is a rather auspicious and novel endeavor and venture on your part, sir, and the fact that could you address, let's just say, the development of the State of Israel under Ben Gurion, the sacrosanctness of the State of Israel in the contemporary global community, the presence purportedly of the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia, which had been investigated to some extent by Professor Henry Louis Gates on an expedition to discover where it was and the veracity of that theory. And lastly, how this ties into the association of the citizenry of the State of Israel with Jews from Russia and Germany in the past. And those are my questions.
Well, you had a lot of them.
Well, I will first go to the establishing of the State of Israel. The establishing of the State of Israel was a work of providence. History is unfolding according to the will of God, and it requires communities and groups and organizations to make history. Individuals do not make history except for themselves. Prior to 1948, our listeners must understand that prior to 1948, that the land of Israel was mostly occupied by Palestinians or an Arab population. But prior to 1948, how many African Americans ever visited Israel? How many even knew that the geographical location existed? How many of them were really proclaiming that Israel, is holy land, the promised land? There were no organizations visiting Israel before 1948. There were no significant number of African Americans even paying any attention to the Middle East. So I'm simply saying that prior, truthfully, to 1948, for us as a people here, Israel didn't exist as a geographical location. But with the establishing of the State of Israel, says that providence, was involved in this. With the establishing of the State of Israel, what has been most significant for us is that in the course of that period of time, it has turned our attention, aside from the conflict in the Middle East, it has turned our attention to that geographical location. And that is extremely important for us as a people, being that a significant number of the African Americans that were brought into this land during the Great Slave Trade were in fact descendants of the biblical Israelites. So as we approach what is referred to as the last days of Western civilization, this dominion, something would have to occur in that land which would turn our attention to that land once again. This occurred after 1948. After 1948, thousands and millions of African Americans have visited that land. That land has become a reality to them once again. Many are beginning to connect themselves up historically to that land. And more significant than all of that, it paved the way for us to make this exodus and to return to that land to establish the long-awaited kingdom of God, which will give the impetus to our people, which will once again shine the light upon our people that they may find their way out of this predicament. So when we look back, we see that the establishing of the State of Israel was directly tied into the redemption of our people in this land. So when we consider those things, and we look at it historically, we would have to acknowledge the significance of that. Well, with the Aliyah, the immigration, the migrations from the European lands, I mean, that has been a natural process since the State of Israel was established mostly by Eastern and Western European Jewish people. And they, needless to say, have allowed those that they could identify with to gravitate to that land. But as we notice today, needless to say, Operation Solomon and Moses, but even with us, thousands of us reside in that land at this time. And we feel now that the people of Israel themselves are facing the reality of the ancient Hebrews and our mission. And all of this is a result of the establishing of the State of Israel, something that did not even hold any type of possibility prior to the establishing of that state. So prior to that, the land was occupied. But who was promoting visitations? Who was promoting, anything in the midst of our community about Israel? It didn't exist. So Israel, the establishing of the State of Israel, this was providence and tied directly, paving the way for your redemption.
Good morning, caller. You're on.
Yes, good morning. This is Brother Haki. How you doing?
Good.
Good. Shalom.
Uvracha.
Well, I like to say that brother, I was there last night to hear you speak. I certainly appreciate the message.
Thank you.
The truth being spoke. You've been a great inspiration to me to continue to search for truth and knowledge. My question, I wish I would have had the opportunity to address it last night, though. Now, in Israel, my understanding that the Khazars or those that are there due to the Balfour Declaration, I think it's they have to submit, or as a citizenship right, they have to serve in the military. I don't know how you do that, or is it mandatory for you officially as a citizen to serve, and do you believe that that's good for our people to serve in the military of Israel? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for your call.
We leave that up to the individuals, more or less personally, a personal decision. But I remind you that I myself personally, I served in the military in a country that I did not arrive to according to my own free will. I served in the U.S. military, and I was brought here forcibly, but I served to defend this country. So it would just make sense at some point in our history, that I arrived in Israel of my own free will. I see that land as my land. I see that land as a necessity for the redemption of my people. I see that land and the establishing of the State of Israel as being part of providence. So subsequently, if it came down, where there was a threat of that land falling into some foreign hands, I would say that we would do whatever is necessary to prevent that. I could not at this point in our history, look back and prefer the condition that existed prior to 1948 to come into existence again. But I want to add to that we at this time in Israel have become a vehicle of peace. We're working diligently with the Palestinians and the Israelis at this time as the vehicle to bring peace. And I feel that that is one of the reasons why we are there at this time. We are trusted by the Israeli government. We are trusted by the Palestinians. And we feel that quite the contrary to what was expected, that we have become that vehicle which will bring peace. We stretch forth our hands to all of the inhabitants in that land. But under no circumstances would I partake of anything that could undermine the existence of the State of Israel.